First round draft order video. As always, we're really excited to have you guys here today. Before we get started, we're going to talk a little bit about some of our strategy going into the first round of the draft and why we're ordering these players in specific orders. This includes all positions, so we're going to be mixing in quarterbacks, running backs, wide ends, tight ends, all the different positions together, just to kind of give people an idea if you're in a draft. You know, when is it okay to start taking wideouts? When is it okay to start taking quarterbacks, or whatever the different things are? But we'll get into that in a second. First, let's just talk about a few other things. First of all, go check out our website. That's a great place where you can see our rankings, the player stats from last season, and of course our comments on it at any time, so you don't have to come and watch our videos all the time. You can just go check it real quick. That's nice. It's set up on mobile now, so we're really excited about that.
Yeah, I think the benefit of a website or our videos, unlike you go out and buy a fantasy ball magazine, and for traditionally that's what I did for many years. Those things are published, and a lot of times they're 2 to 3 months old, but we go on our website daily, add information, adjust rankings, put new information on there, so up to date you can go on there and find new information. But go ahead.
Yeah, exactly. We make these videos from our documents that are posted online, so all of our research is there at any time. Another thing for you guys, if you'd like to support us, you can check us out on Patreon. There's a link down in the description to our website and to our Patreon. We don't have any rewards or any systems set up there right now, but if you just want to donate like $1 or $2 a month, it'd be greatly appreciated. It's something that we don't do anything with except for to save it and to put it into upgrading our equipment. For example, we just upgraded this mic, even probably just a couple of videos. We've only recorded a few with it, and hopefully continue to offer you guys a better product. You know, unfortunately, it's just us two, and it's hard to afford new equipment, and we don't make any money off of this really. We do. It's really not that much. It's definitely not more for our time or whatever. But anyways, we won't be spending it on Doritos and Mountain Dew or anything. We're going to put it right back into giving you guys better information as much as we can.
Yeah. The other thing we have coming up is looking next week. We're going to publish our early defense and kicker rankings. Myself, Christian, and Ryan will be in that video. And in that same video, we're going to do our name drawing for the hat. We said once we hit 1,000 subscribers, which we did. Thank you, by the way. In that video, myself, Ryan, and Christian will be drawing a name out of that hat to give out the one who rewarded that. So.
Yeah, exactly. All you have to do if you want to win the hat or be entered in to win the hat, just be subscribed and leave a comment down below that says something like I want to win the hat or something like that. But speaking of comments, we really want to build a community here, guys. We want to talk to you guys, and we want you guys to talk to each other. So like the video and leave comments, ask questions. If you see somebody else who's posted a comment there, put your input on his questions and things. Sometimes we miss questions. We get a lot of questions. They're hard to answer all of them, but we can all just go on there and talk about it. It's really fun. Of course, we're at this point in the season where we don't have football to watch, so we might as well talk about it. That's what we have. So. All right, well, let's get into it. I know you have some things to say.
Yeah, before we get into it, one thing that we want to discuss is kind of how we're going to approach the first round, but why don't we go to that first slide? So here's what you're not going to see from me, or I think I can speak for Ryan or Christian. What you're not going to see from us is taking a quarterback in the first round, or quite honestly, I'm not going to take a quarterback early on. Here's a few reasons why we're not going to, and why we advise you to stay away from quarterbacks. I know it's great to have a name like Rodgers or Brady on your team, but I've won most of my championships with quarterbacks that rank outside the top 10. The league has become increasingly passer-friendly through the years. Okay, more teams run spread formations, shotgun formations. Now, back in the day, tight end was typically drafted for blocking, but now they're drafting tight ends because they want another weapon there. A lot of these tight ends are very effective in the passing game. And so all this means that more and more quarterbacks are putting up bigger numbers, and more touchdown passes, more passing yards. And according to the law of supply and demand, that really drives down the value of quarterbacks. Okay, for an example, I want to give a comparison. Let's take a look at the idea of hitting the 30 touchdown passes in a season. It used to be like that was like kind of a high water mark for a quarterback. If you reach that goal, you'd be in the MVP conversation. So going back in 1994, only 3 quarterbacks did that. And those 3 were Marino, Favre, and Steve Young, Hall of Fame quarterbacks there, right? But now reaching that plateau has become increasingly more common. Back in 2015, 11 quarterbacks reached 30 touchdown passes. 2 more ended with 29, and 3 additional quarterbacks were on pace for 30 touchdown passes before injuries derailed their season. Now, I'm not saying that you shouldn't draft one. If Aaron Rodgers is there late in the 3rd round, maybe early 4th round, maybe you should consider at that point taking him, but he's not going to be there. So avoid the inevitable quarterback run that's going to happen. Build your bench with running backs, wide receivers, etc. Looks like you're going to say something there, Christian.
Yeah, exactly. So over the last 3 years, the average #1 quarterback has scored about 270 points. If you go out and you get the number 12, if you're in a 12-team league and you get the 12th best quarterback, it means you have the worst starting quarterback in the league. And yet, that quarterback, on average over the last 3 years, has scored you about 210 points, which means you're missing out on about 60 fantasy points, which sounds pretty bad. You don't want to miss out on any fantasy points. But as the 12th quarterback taken, you can take him in the 10, 11, 12th round range. Load up on other talent, and that's actually far less at running back if you get the number 1 to the number 12 running back.
Yeah, and I think if you look at that statistic too, when you're thinking about 60 points, it's not over 13 games. Those statistics were based on 17 games. So you got to take that 60 divided by 17. It's not nearly as big as of a hit as you would think.
Anyways, but if you make that if you make that decision to wait at another position, if you go from the number 1 scoring running back to the number 12 scoring running back, there's a far greater difference. And so we have a huge philosophy: no quarterbacks in the first round, no quarterbacks in the second, probably no quarterbacks in the third and the fourth. We really like to wait as long as we
really
can.
do like to wait. Yeah, and in fact, we have another another graph there. We see the bar graph, and we have another line graph there, and that shows going all the way back to 1970. We went through every year, we gathered all the statistics, and we took a look at that. How many quarterbacks hit 4,000 passing yards and 30 touchdown passes? And you see back in 1970, it was like non-existent, and that bar just continues, that line continues to go up and up and up. More and more quarterbacks are doing that. And so it's easier to get a good value quarterback later on, and you can load up on some studs. So that's what you're not going to see is in the first round, or probably second, third, fourth, or fifth round. Stay away from the QBs.
All right, so we might as well get into our first picks then.
Why don't you go first, Christian?
All right, so this was kind of interesting. We happen to have the same first picks. We didn't talk about who we were picking before we put this on there, before we were ready. We kind of wanted to, think through our own process and come through it. But I think both of us would agree easily Todd Gurley is the number 1, and there's maybe only one other guy who could really compete with him. Todd Gurley is the center of a great offense, coming off a dominant season in which he had 1,300 yards rushing, 13 touchdowns off a solid 4.7 yards per carry. On top of that, he goes out and gets 64 catches, almost 800 receiving yards, which is just monstrous, insane, and 6 touchdowns. Especially that last few games, the last 3 or 4 game stretch, he was unbelievable, hands down the best running back last season, and nothing changes for him. That offense, they still have the same quarterback in Jared Goff, the same line, the same receiving core almost entirely, except for they get Brandon Cooks instead of Watkins, which you might argue is a bit of an upgrade. Man, he's the center of that offense. I don't see any problems with him. He doesn't have any injury issues. And the way that offense supported him last year, it's going to be another phenomenal season for him. What do you have to say? I don't want to take everything.
It's good. Well, before we get into it, I think it's important. You got to contextualize this information. So we did a 12-team draft. So here's kind of the framework of how we work this draft out. It's 12-team standard scoring. That's important because that's going to affect your how you draft. So it's 12-team standard. We're drafting with a scenario that you have to have a quarterback, 2 running backs, 3 wideouts, tight end, kicker, and a defense, okay? And I'll tell you why that's important. So I'll get to my draft pick, and that's why it's important. We talked about it's a standard league 12-team, and we'll get to that later. I put Todd Gurley slightly ahead of Bell. And the reason why I did that because of his more consistent touchdown output. If you take a look at his career, Todd Gurley's averaged 0.8 touchdowns per game. He's had 35 and 44 games. Look at Bell's rate. He's averaging 0.68. So Gurley's had a better touchdown ratio. Now with either back, you can't lose either way. If you get Gurley, you get Bell, you're going to be just fine. You can't really lose on that pick. They're both excellent. But when it comes to standard scoring leagues, usually touchdowns are the king. Mm-hmm. And so in standard leagues, you got to weight touchdowns a lot heavier than yardage or even catches. That would, of course, go up in PPR leagues. Now, if you're in a PPR league, I'd probably switch it up. Bell would probably be my number 1 guy, and Gurley would be number 2. Once again, same thing. They're both excellent wide receivers out of the backfield, and they're very dependable, and you can trust them both. Now, look at Todd Gurley. For me, had a great rookie season. He had a bad second year, but I chalk that up to 1, bad coaching by Fisher, and 2, Jared Goff just being a rookie quarterback. So he comes out last year, gets over 2,000 total yards, 19 touchdowns. He's 6'1", 227. Like you had mentioned, he's good weapons around him. And I like the fact he's surrounded with good weapons. It's going to make it harder for teams to load the box and shut him down. If you go to sites that calculate the average draft position currently, now we know the average draft position is going to change a lot to where in May right now it's going to change when we get to August. But right now, Todd Gurley is rated out as the number 1 guy consistently in every mock draft.
Yeah, exactly. I couldn't agree with you more. Bell and Gurley were hands down the top 2 guys for me, and so I guess for me it's a little bit more of why is Bell number 2. So I guess we'll just get into our number 2 rankings. But first, we're going to have a poll on this video, guys. Just vote yes or no whether or not you want a part 2 for this video, which means that we'll do a round 2. We'll remove these players from the list and we'll do a second round and talk a bit more about that. If you don't, say no, and we will, if that's what people want, they don't want another video, we'll go on and we'll do something else. But if you guys enjoy this, just let us know and we can do it again.
Yeah. Also, you can ask too, do you want us to do the same thing, but instead of running through a standard scenario, do the same thing but running through a PPR scenario? Let us know that also.
Yeah, exactly. So we're going to have both of those polls for you guys to take while watching this video. All right, so now we're going to talk about our number 2 guys.
Why don't you go ahead and start with your number 2 guy, David Johnson.
So my number 2 guy is David Johnson. Now you remember back to 2016, he was so dominant, but let's stop and take a second, and I want to go back to 2015. Then he had 125 carries, 581 yards, and 8 touchdowns with 46 receptions, 457 yards, and 4 touchdowns. Now that wasn't great, but that year he was really still working into that role. They clearly had some hesitations about him. He was healthy all year and on the team, yet they only gave him 125 carries. And so that was really just a matter of them not really knowing that he was the man yet and him really working into that role. And yet, he managed to get 12 combined touchdowns. He still had 46 catches. What I really like about David Johnson is he always keeps himself in the game by being such a good receiving back. So now we go to 2016, and they finally get smart and give him the ball a ton. He gets 293 carries, over 1,200 yards, 16 rushing touchdowns. Because he's in the game more, he gets 80 receptions, 879 yards, and another 4 touchdowns. And that's the key thing for me, the 2 things that I note that make David Johnson so dominant, and the reason that for me he is number 2. First is the touchdowns. You just said it. Touchdowns are king in standard league. And the last year that he was healthy, he had 20 touchdowns. The year before, he had about the third the role that he had, and yet he still managed to get 12. He's a touchdown machine. The other thing that I like, even if it's not in a PPR league, he catches the ball out of the backfield. In 2016, he had almost 900 receiving yards. That guy is never coming off the field. If an Arizona Cardinal is scoring this season, it's going to be David Johnson. So that's what I really like about him. Additionally, I really like the fact that they have Sam Bradford coming in and taking over for quarterback. I think he should have a fairly solid season. I don't think he's going to be great or wonderful fantasy-wise, but why I like that is he's a big check-down guy. You know who he's going to keep throwing the ball to? David Johnson. So that's why I got to put him number 2. Again, I'll talk a little bit why I dropped Bell a bit further down. I'm probably going to get a lot of hate for that, but I think Johnson's got to go number 2 for those 2 reasons, man. He's always in the game and he's always finding the end zone.
Okay. I like David Johnson. I just don't like him as my number 2 guy. For my number 2 guy, I like Le'Veon Bell. And I said you could kind of flip-flop him and Todd Gurley, but in standard leagues, Gurley's number 1. If it was PPR leagues, Le'Veon Bell would be my number 1 guy. He had a good year last year, but he did see a different production. His yards per carry was low at 4.0. Now, I think that's why this happened. Last year, he started slow because he missed the entire preseason. He was holding out. He didn't want the franchise tag. He wanted a long-term contract. So the first 2 weeks, his yards per carry were 3.2. They were brutal. It took him about 3 weeks to really kind of get back in football shape. Once he did, he really took off, started hitting on all cylinders. He is really, in my opinion, of all the running backs, probably the safest pick and the most consistent, reliable back in the league. If you look at 3 of the last 4 years, Bell, when healthy, has averaged 91 catches per season. When you project his catches per game and extrapolate that over 16 games, right? In the previous 3 years that he's been healthy, he's had a yards per carry of 4.9, 4.7, 4.9. During those same 3 years, he's averaged 2,015 total yards with an average of 10.33 touchdowns. So it feels like he's been around for a while. That's the other thing to think, okay, Le'Veon Bell has been around for a long time, but he's still only 26 years old. So he's got good years ahead of him. He's still in his prime. Just like Todd Gurley, he benefits from having a healthy support system around with Ben, Brown, Juju Smith-Schuster, those guys around him. It's going to make it difficult for defenses to load the box. So I like Le'Veon Bell as my number 2 guy.
All right, I think that's a solid pick. I definitely like him, and I'll talk about him in a minute. Guess we should just move on.
There we go.
Now I'll go, and now I have Le'Veon Bell at number 3. Here's why I have him here. Okay, so last year was his third year in a row with 1,200 yards rushing. He had a great year, plus he had 85 receptions on 107 targets. He is insane. I think he's probably the best receiving running back in the NFL. So dominant, but we're in a standard league. And I'm sorry, but those 85 catches, they don't get you points. So what do we talk about? Again, you go back to touchdown is king. Only twice in his career has he had 10 or more touchdowns. That's okay. That's not bad. I'm not saying he's a bad running back, but Gurley, Johnson, Kamara, Kareem, Elliott, all these guys are having seasons with 10, 12 more touchdowns than that. And you know what? Bell sometimes struggles to get that many touchdowns. He gets a lot of yards, he gets a lot of catches, he gets a lot of carries, but there are too many weapons in Pittsburgh for him to get that many touchdowns to compete as the number one or as the number two guy. Again, in a PPR league, I bump him up, but that's a major concern for me that there are just simply too many weapons there for him to score that many touchdowns. And then again, what you said last year, only 4.0 yards per carry. That's bad. I mean, you have to pull your emotions out of it. Le'Veon Bell is a great running back, but that is bad. If I'm looking at a running back, that's a cause for concern for me. I don't know what's going on there. I like what you said that he really picked it up last season, but 4.0 is simply too low. I think that he'll pick it up again, but it's definitely not great.
Yeah, well, the first two games he had 3.2. If you take that out of there, I think he averaged 4.5 yards approximately the rest of the year. He didn't play at all the preseason. What's interesting is you're talking about Le'Veon Bell's your number 3 guy, and you have concerns, but he's still your number 3 guy.
He's still my number 3. I was just about to say that. I felt like I was coming across kind of hard, but he's still Le'Veon Bell. Yeah. He's still one of the safest running back options out there, and he's still so dominant. Like I said with David Johnson, he keeps himself out there no matter what down it is because he can catch and he can run. And especially the patient running style that he has, he's just one play away from a big, long touchdown. And so I really like him, but I think that those two things, first of all, just being the touchdowns, that sometimes he's a little bit lower than these other guys, and the yards per carry last year, were enough for me just to say, okay, maybe he's not the number 1 guy this season, maybe he's number 3.
Okay. So for me, my number 3 pick is going to be Ezekiel Elliot. Now, we're going to sound like a broken record when this video is all done, but in standard leagues, touchdowns reign supreme, right? Like that's just important to know right off the get-go. In 25 games in his career, he's got 25 touchdowns, Ezekiel Elliott. Now, some people might say, well, why'd you put him third? Aren't there safer, better options after his off year last year? I would say to that, probably not really. I think he had a fall off in production, but last year's struggles, I think, could be attributed to the constant back and forth of his pending suspension. Honestly, moment by moment, ups and downs, if he's going to play, he's not going to play, is there going to be an injunction, these sort of things. I think it made it very difficult for him to prepare mentally and physically. The thing that I like about him, too, is he runs behind the best offensive line in football, and so that's consistent. Now, if you take a look at last year, once again, he struggled, but yet the last 6 games, okay, before the suspension was upheld, he was averaging 118 rushing yards per game. He's also got good hands in the passing game, probably not as good as Bell or Johnson or some others, but he's still got decent hands in the passing game. He's actually more bigger and physical than Bell and Gurley, therefore you should see many red zone carries during his career. There's no real glaring weaknesses in his game at this point. If you look at standard leagues, if you look at mock drafts using standard scoring format, he's actually slightly ahead of Bell. And right now, here's how it lists. If you went to a website that looks at average draft position and looks at standard leagues, 12 teams, etc., here's what they're finding. The number 1 guy is Todd Gurley, and he's averagely drafted at 1.6. And then Ezekiel Elliott is second at 2.2, and then third is Bell at 2.6. So I think a lot of people out there are really kind of gauging on this guy, and they feel good about his rebound year.
Yeah, I like that. Fairly solid pick, Elliott. I have some concerns. I'll talk about him later, though. So we'll move on to the next guys then. All right, so my number 4 is Alvin Kamara. He's a guy that had a very, very, very dominant rookie year. He had 120 carries for 728 yards and 8 touchdowns on a monstrous 6.1 yards per carry. Those numbers are insane. On top of that, he received the ball very well. He had 100 targets, 81 catches, 826 yards, and 5 touchdowns receiving. So he combined for 13 touchdowns. So prolific. I don't know if we've seen a rookie running back come out and do both so well. I don't know if we've seen a rookie running back come out with both 8 rushing touchdowns on 6.1 yards per carry and 81 catches, 800 plus yards, and 5 receiving touchdowns. I think he's able to do it so well. I don't know if there's a running back as young as him that can run and receive as well as he can. He's so dominant. In fact, let's compare his receiving yards to some other guys, because his running game, his rushing game was a little bit dampened last year by Ingram, and simply his rushing stats were pretty good, but his yards were low. 8 touchdowns, okay. He didn't get a whole lot of carries. He wasn't able to compete with some of those other elite guys here. But with 100 targets and 81 catches, he keeps himself up there with David Johnson, Gurley, and Bell, and all these other guys. Here's the thing that I really like about him that boosts me ahead of last year. He will get more carries for 2 reasons. First of all, Ingram's 4-game suspension means he's the man for 4 games. The second reason is that those numbers sound really great, but he really didn't have any solid numbers until the 4th game. Took him the first 4 games, he only averaged 3.75 carries a game. They were really not giving him a shot. It wasn't until late in the 4th game that he caught a ball out of the backfield and went for a long touchdown, and they realized what he could do and finally started to use him in that offense. So he basically missed a quarter of the season.
Well, I think a big bonus to him was when they traded away Adrian Peterson. And that really opened up the door.
Yes, it definitely did. And then finally, the thing that I really like is that they brought in Kamara, they brought in Peterson, and clearly they didn't have much faith in Ingram. And now Ingram gets a suspension. I think that Kamara is really going to fall into this role solid as the man, and I think he's going to get a lot more carries. Of course, his yards per carry will go down, but I think he'll have more yards, and he'll continue to do what he did in the passing game. So that's why he's my number 4 guy.
All right. So my number 4 guy is David Johnson. So if I was in a PPR league, I'd flip-flop him and Ezekiel Elliot, the 3 and 4 position. But right now I got David in standard leagues as the number 4 guy. David has better hands and more catches than Ezekiel. Now David, just like the other guys we talked about, has a nose for the end zone. In 2015, like you mentioned, in 2016, he had a combined 12 and 20 touchdowns those 2 years. In fact, in the first 2 years, in 33 games, he's had 32 touchdowns. He's got great hands. He's only behind Bell and Christian McCaffrey in terms of that area. He had 80 catches in 2016. And he had 6 catches last year in game 1 before he got hurt and he was out for the year. I love what he said here. David Johnson said that his goal is still in a season to have 1,000 rushing yards and 1,000 receiving in the same season. I think it's a lofty goal. I love guys that set high goals like that. Of course, there's a bit of realism in there, but I see that that's actually a reachable goal for a guy like that. He's another guy that's a complete back, and he falls into what I would call our tier 1 rankings.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, I definitely like that pick. That's a very solid one. Let's move on to our number 5 guys. My number 5 guy is DeAndre Hopkins. And this is weird for me because if I have the 5th pick overall, I'm going to feel guilty not taking a running back. I really want to secure that, and it hurts me to not secure my solid number 1 starting running back. But DeAndre Hopkins is too good not to take. And here's why. First of all, if you're taking the 5th pick overall, honestly anyone in the 1st round, you need to know that he's going to play. So let's get his health out of the way. In his 5-year NFL career, he has never missed a game due to injury. You can rely on this guy. He will always be there. So now that we have that out of the way, the next question is we haven't seen much of him with Deshaun Watson. How is he going to play? Well, in the 7 games he played with Watson, he had 7 receiving touchdowns. He was so dominant with him. He was so good. He had multiple 100-yard games. He played so well. And yet, when he leaves, when Watson gets hurt and he's playing with other quarterbacks, he still gets 6 touchdowns in the next 8 games. He was so dominant last year, and despite only having a good quarterback for about half the year, he was still the number 1 fantasy guy. And we'll talk about why in a minute. But this is a theme that he is able to produce with no matter what quarterback he's had. Over the last few years, he's had quarterbacks such as Schaub, Keenum, Yates, Osweiler, Whedon, Mallett, Hoyer, Savage. Bad quarterbacks. I mean, these are just bad quarterbacks. There's a reason none of these guys held on to that job. There's a reason there's so many names in there. And yet, since 2015, he's averaged 95 catches on 171 targets, over 1,200 yards, and 9 touchdowns a season. So dominant. So he's almost matchup proof. He's almost quarterback proof. He's so good. You just throw up the ball to him with that big body. And here's why. He's not just an unbelievable wide receiver with great hands who runs great routes with a big body. That team has a bad defense. Last year, they were the worst defense as far as points per game. They allowed 27.3 points per game. He's getting so many 4th quarter catches. They didn't make any improvements to that defense in the offseason that were really significant that tell me they're going to really turn it around. So I think that he is so good. He's getting a good quarterback back. Hopefully this will be his 1st year with a really solid quarterback. And you know what? They're going to need him to play well if they want to stay in games as the number 1 option in that offense.
I love DeAndre Hopkins. I'll get to him in a little bit. I wouldn't feel guilty if I was you necessarily taking a wide receiver here. I could see that argument. If you felt any guilt, it would probably be taking him ahead of Antonio Brown. But I'm sure, I'm no opportunity to talk to that. Speak to that a little bit.
Yeah.
So for me, my number 5 pick is Kareem Hunt. Okay, I'm bucking the trend here. I know many of you are going to hate this pick, and I can live with that. I can deal with that. I know the criticism's coming. Right now, Hunt on average is actually taken as the 7th running back overall, behind Fournette and Kamara. And so you're certainly tracking in terms of your Kamara pick where everybody else sees him. But I know the last 2 years, there's a number of times where people have disagreed with me out there and disagreed with us out there. We said stay away from Ty Montgomery. Some people hated that. We were right. We said, don't get too excited about Tariq Cohen after week 2. This is still Jordan Howard's team. We broke that all down. A lot of haters. We were right. We were right when we said stay away from Cam Newton and Matt Ryan after the MVP seasons, and we were right. So let's just see how this plays out. But I would take Kareem Hunt over guys like Antonio Brown, Kamara, and Leonard Fournette at this point. So he's my number 4 guy. I don't really understand where all the hate's coming on Hunt. I know people like him, but right now there's a lot of suspicion, a lot of concern about his year. What's not to like about this guy? His rookie year, he goes on, he has a 4.9 yards per carry. That's better than Todd Gurley his rookie year. He had 53 catches, 455 receiving yards, 11 TDs. Okay, some of those other backs have question marks, quite honestly. I think Kamara's question mark is not his talent, but how much production will he lose once Ingram comes back? For me, Leonard Fournette had a yards per carry 3.9. I like Leonard, by the way, but he's got a terrible quarterback and no proven wide receivers, so I think he's going to see a lot of loaded boxes. I think Hunt is in a great position to be successful, so I'm not really sure. He's going to be their bell cow going into this year. He's highly involved in all aspects of the offense. He's a true 3-down back in every sense of the term. Last year, he ran the rushing title. I've never seen a guy that comes out and wins a rushing title, and really not a lot of people are talking about this guy, surprisingly. He doesn't have any real glaring weaknesses in his game. He can really do it all like we had said. He can run the ball, catch the ball in the backfield. If there was a weakness, and this is probably splitting hairs, he's not a big back. With that said, he's not a small back either. So can he be durable? Can he handle that wear and tear? He did wear down for part of the season last year. But that's not uncommon for a rookie to do that. Now, I would draft Alvin Kamara ahead of him if it wasn't for Ingram being there. But Ingram is there. I think you need to calculate that a little bit. And I mentioned before that concerns I had about Leonard Fournette. I like Leonard Fournette, by the way, but I do have concerns because of the lack of weapons around him. So that's kind of where I sit right now. My number 5 guy is Kareem Hunt. So let's hear all the comments.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, actually, as Kareem Hunt as the number 5 running back. I have him as my number 5 running back, my number 6 overall. So we'll just get into our number 6 guys then. I can tell you why I agree with you. Right, so as I just said, Kareem Hunt is my number 6 guy, and here's why. First of all, he comes out as rookie year and has the rushing title, over 1,300 yards. That's good. Some other boxes we want to check: yards per carry. That's good. 4.9, very good yards per carry. Gets 8 rushing touchdowns. He's not absolutely phenomenal. He can't quite keep up with Kamara and Bell and Johnson and Gurley as far as his receiving, but he's still, I would even say, above average with 53 catches, 455 yards, and 3 receiving touchdowns. So he's able to do that to help his team out. I love that he only had 1 fumble last year, and it was week 1. I can't blame him. You get your first game in the NFL, those hits come hard. I'm not surprised he fumbled that game. But then after that, didn't fumble once. Ball security, I love that. That's huge. And he's not in a running back by committee system. He is the man. He's going to get a lot. So I really like that. I really like that he's playing for Andy Reid, who loves to lean on solid running backs, and he's a solid running back. So they're not going to be afraid to give him tons of carries and use him in a lot of different ways. Now, here's my concerns. Last year, over a 7-week stretch, he averaged just 45 yards per game, 3.32 yards per carry, and 0 touchdowns a game. He didn't score once through that stretch. He didn't even average 50 yards, and he had just an abysmal 3.32 yards per carry. That scares me, because think about it. This is a 16-game season, so 8 games is basically half the season, and that was a 7-game stretch. So almost half the season, he was not an option. He was just not an option at all. And so that's what really scares me. Now, they were such a good offense other weeks that you can tell that that's clearly not Kansas City, and that's clearly not the way that they typically are. That was a fluke. Flukes happen. I hate to just say, well, it happened, it's not going to happen again, but that sort of thing was very, very rare. And so that's something that really holds me back, especially that they had a veteran quarterback in Alex Smith. How am I supposed to expect that a stretch like that isn't going to happen again, even if or even now that they downgrade at quarterback to a guy who just doesn't have as much experience? He may be better once he retires, but Patrick Mahomes is still not as experienced and could be definitely vulnerable to some bad weeks. Again, he was so dominant. He is one of the best pure runners in the game right now on a team that's going to lean on him and give him tons of bulk. But again, I'm just a little bit concerned about generally that offense because of the stretch he had last year.
So, yeah, and it's tough. You don't want those droughts like that can crush a team. So, I mean, for him to end up with a 4.9 yards per carry, the stats he did when you consider what you said in those 6 games, that just shows you how dominant he was the other weeks. Now, on those weeks that he has terrible games, it crushes your team. But then, of course, when he has that week where he goes out for 175 yards and a couple TDs, he can single-handedly carry your team. So, does it all wash out in the end? Well, that's the hope. So, I want to get to my guy, Antonio Brown. Antonio Brown, forget the slide, we clicked the slide too early. So for me, Antonio Brown is my first wide receiver off the board, and Antonio Brown is the gold standard as a wide receiver, whatever medal you want to use, platinum, whatever. He is by far and away the best wide receiver, hands down. Now I know a lot of people are waiting for that kind of proverbial step back statistically, and it could happen. This could be that Odell Beckham or Hopkins could kind of pass him statistically. With that said, I don't play hunches. I look at numbers and I look at facts. I don't see anything on paper that tells me that he's going to take a step back this year. He's had 5 consecutive seasons. He's averaged over 100 catches per season, 1,570 yards and 10 TDs. Don't overthink this pick. He's the best wide receiver, future Hall of Famer. He should be the #1 wide receiver off the board for you guys. He is my number 6 pick. But you're going to get to your number 7 pick, which is Antonio Brown.
Which is Antonio Brown. So first of all, let's talk about the good. You're absolutely right. Averaged over 1,500 yards receiving the last 5 years, averaging 116 targets and 10 touchdowns a season for 5 straight years. He's the model of consistency. You're absolutely right that he's the gold standard. However, averaging the last 5 years for both receivers really isn't fair. DeAndre Hopkins spent a lot of the first couple of years, a few years ago, just getting used to the NFL and playing with terrible quarterbacks. And so, like I said, what did he do with Watson, who finally looks like he's going to be the solid quarterback for him for a whole season? So that's the first thing, that I think we're finally going to get a level playing ground for these two as far as quarterback play goes. And yet, despite playing half the year with a brutal quarterback situation, Hopkins outscored Antonio Brown fantasy-wise. And here's why. Here's the reason that Antonio Brown is not the #1 wide receiver. Is that the Steelers have Le'Veon Bell, Juju Smith-Schuster, and the number 7th ranked defense last season. Their defense is good enough that they don't need to score a ton of points. Their running back is good enough. Their secondary wideout is good enough. They don't need Antonio Brown to be an absolute monster for him. Whereas Hopkins kind of needs to be insane. That offense runs through him. I don't want to take anything away from Antonio Brown. Antonio Brown is the better wide receiver, but he is not the better fantasy wide receiver. Simply, he is needed less and has less opportunities, specifically in the 4th quarter. That's what it is for me. Okay. But I think he is unbelievable, and I really like what you said. He's the gold standard. He's the best receiver in the league.
Yeah, a lot of his statistics. I'm going to get to, for me, DeAndre Hopkins is my number 7 overall in the first round and my number 2 wide receiver off the board. There's a lot of things I'll get into why I like him. One of the things that you had mentioned, I think previously, is that the Houston defense is brutal. I think last year you said they gave up like 27.5 points per game, which means they have to play a lot of catch up and throw the ball a lot. But I like DeAndre Hopkins. He's my number 7 guy here. He's got a lot of talent. He's very athletic, and he's still relatively young at 26 years old. I want to break down some statistics for you so you can appreciate exactly how good he is. 2 of the last 4 seasons, he had touchdowns, 11 one season and 13 another. So obviously he's a guy that finds the end zone. He averaged 1,275 receiving yards over the last 4 years. His resume includes one season with 111 catches. He's had yardage totals in 3 seasons of 1,210 yards, 1,521 yards, 1,378 yards. The only thing that really is keeping him from the Odell Beckham or Antonio Brown type numbers is really just subpar quarterback play. This guy has been handcuffed to some very bad quarterbacks. Consider who his quarterbacks have been going all the way back to 2013. Okay, and I'm kind of arguing for you here almost your point.
Mm-hmm.
Although really it's splitting hairs because we just flipped spots with them.
Yeah, exactly.
And so in 2013, his quarterback was Matt Schaub for 8 games and Case Keenum for 8. Now, Case Keenum, I think it's important to remember that Case Keenum, before last year, wasn't very good. And in fact, what I think really turned around for Case Keenum is really quarterback guru Mike Sherman. So I think you have to take that into account. In 2014, his quarterbacks were Ryan Fitzpatrick, Ryan Mallett, Case Keenum. And that was the year he led the league with 111 catches, 1,521 yards, and 13 TDs. His quarterback that year was Brian Hoyer for 9 games, Ryan Mallett for 4, and TJ Yates for 2. In 2016, he had Brock Osweiler and Tom Savage. In 2017, he had Mike Savage, Deshaun Watson, and TJ Yates. So what's clear for me is this is a guy that needs really an average quarterback or even sometimes below average and still can have very, very good years. I think with Watson, he gets more than an average. In fact, I think he gets an above average quarterback. So this is the first year we can really see what he can do with a good quarterback, throwing him the ball. Going back to what you said, if you look at the games that he had where he played and Watson was out there in the field with him, and you project that stat out over 16 games, it turns out to be 96 catches, 1,472 yards, and 16 TDs. I actually think those numbers could be better because, let's be honest, not Hopkins, but Watson is still young and still building rapport. So I think that sky's the limit for Hopkins. I like him as a number 7 guy.
Yeah, exactly. I like what you said. Very close, just flipped. And so very good. Both guys that we're fine to have. They separate themselves from all of the receivers that we're going to talk about. So now we'll talk about our number 8 guys. So my number 8 guy is now I'm finally going to talk about Ezekiel Elliot. I know you talked about him a little bit ago. And a lot of people might think that number 8 is too far down on the list. And you're probably thinking the reason he's this far down is that he's had maybe off-field issues. But let's just pretend, and that's a real problem. I don't like to wonder, is my guy going to get suspended or what's happening? But let's just pretend that he's going to play. He's a very dominant running back with one of the best offensive lines in the NFL. You stole my stat earlier. I was going to say, he had 25 touchdowns his first 25 games. Very, very dominant numbers. I mean, that's a touchdown a game. That's better than you can find just about anywhere else from any other running back. Here where my concerns lie. My concerns lie in that passing game for a few reasons. First of all, they don't really have any wide receivers there, and they don't have anything that's really going to keep other teams from keeping pressure off of him. They just lost Dez Bryant and Jason Witten. So yes, they gained Allen Hurns, but even if their receiving corps is just as good as it was last year, it's not good enough to keep pressure off of him. Teams are going to stack the box, and we really saw it last year. Even though he played fairly well, teams stacked the box, and he had only 4.1 yards per carry. So you can see that that's really showing a bit of a sign on him as a running back and keeping him from being even better. And then finally, him in the passing game. He doesn't really help that passing game. In fact, he's only caught 3 touchdowns in the last 2 seasons, or his first 2 seasons, which isn't absolutely terrible. But in the modern day of running backs, guys are getting 5 and 6 and 7, and that's what's really good. So 3 is just all right at best. So again, Dallas's passing game is really what concerns me with him. Teams are going to stack the box. He doesn't get involved in that. And it might even be worse this year than last year again. But the biggest concern, despite all of that, is, again, like I mentioned at the beginning, is he going to get suspended? Even if he isn't suspended, these are the concerns that I have for him.
Yeah, that's obviously a concern is his conduct. But as of late, he's been quiet, and I think that bodes well. Hopefully this guy's kind of got his head on straight now. So for me, my number 8 pick is Alvin Kamara. Alvin was electric last year. His yards per carry, as you said, 6.1. He had 13 TDs, 81 catches, over 1,500 total yards, which is amazing when you consider the fact that the first few games he was 3rd on the depth chart behind Ingram and Adrian Peterson. After they traded Adrian away, his year really took off. He has tier 1 type talent. For me, Ingram hurts his value. Okay, he really does. He hurts his value. I know that a lot of people are saying, well, now Ingram's suspended, and that's true. But you can't ignore not just the suspension, but the fact that Ingram really last 2 years has been a stud. Now, maybe some of that was the performance-enhancing drugs. We'll find out. Last 2 years, though, Ingram had yards per carry of 4.9. He averaged over 1,000 rushing yards per season. He had over 50 catches average per season and averaged 11 touchdowns. So this is a guy that's a really, really productive running back. Okay. Now, going back to what people are considering, okay, he is getting suspended for 4 games. That's going to be a huge bump for Alvin Kamara. But that's still only 30% of the fantasy games, not including playoffs. So at least 70% of the season, those two are going to be in the backfield together. And I guarantee this, okay, mark my words, the Saints aren't going to let Alvin Kamara wear down. They're not going to let him become a running back that's going to get 20 and 25 carries per game routinely. It's just not going to happen. So when Ingram comes back from suspension, he's going to be well rested. And I think he's going to kind of carry a lot of that load and take some of that pressure off him. I love this guy, Alvin Kamara. He's very talented. But because of Ingram, for me, he just isn't a top 3 to 5 running back yet, although he's a guy that's got a very, very high ceiling. I like him, but he's my number 8 guy.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Very high ceiling, and I like what you said. He's a little bit of a smaller guy, so hopefully they don't let that be a reason to keep him from getting too many carries. But we'll move on now to our next guys. Our number 9 is Saquon Barkley, and this is really weird for me. I put him in our boom video as a boom simply because I was just so excited about him, and I would almost never take a running back this early. But let's start with rookie running backs. Kareem Hunt, Alvin Kamara, Ezekiel Elliot, Leonard Fournette. These guys have all proven that rookie running backs can come in and be elite fantasy running backs. So that's not a question. That's not a concern. The question is Saquon Barkley talented enough and in the right team? Those are the two questions. Yes, he's talented enough, at least I believe. We've never seen him play in the NFL, and that's our biggest concern and our biggest kind of risk with taking him. But no running back has really been praised as much as he has and had so much, I guess, expectations going into his first year as far as people think that he's so smart and so athletic. He's fast, he's agile, he can catch, he runs so hard. From the running backs I mentioned earlier, he runs harder and better than Alvin Kamara, but he catches better than Fournette, Elliott, Hunt. He doesn't have any injury issues, which I really like. So what it really comes down to is the system. Are the Giants the system for him? Well, they just got a new offensive coordinator, and they just got some new offensive linemen, which was a big issue for them last year. With Ingram, Shepard, and Odell Beckham, there will be no 8-man boxes on him. He is in the perfect system for him to blow up. I think he's going to have a huge year receiving and rushing. This is not a running back by committee team. He's going to get all the carries and all the time that he can handle. So I think this is going to be just a monstrous year for him.
Yeah, I'm huge on Saquon Barkley. I'm not huge enough to make him my number 9 guy, but I like him a lot. So for me, my number 9 guy is Odell Beckham. In the first 4 seasons, if you look at his per game stats and you take and project that over 16 games, here's what this guy's averaged. 107 catches, 1,506 yards, and 13 TDs. He's amazing. He's got a lot of talent. He's still young at 25. If I have any concerns, is he actually has had some declining stats since year one. Now, maybe not look at that initially if you look at his numbers, but if you break it down a little bit deeper, you'll find there's been a slight decline. Now, if you take a look at year 2 statistics, you have to remember, first of all, in year 1, the great year that he had was only 12 games. So those statistics were off the charts. And then you look at 2016, he had less yards and TDs, even though he played one more game than the year before that. Of course, then last year got injured. So he's seen a decrease statistically. With that said, that's very minor. I'm almost picking on the guy, really, because he's been great. When he's on the field, he produces. He's very talented. I think the drafting of Barkley and the upgrades at offensive line, they spent a lot of money in free agency, and of course in the second round they drafted Will Hernandez, and I think that's going to help their offensive line. All those things I think bode well for Odell Beckham. He's my number 9 guy.
All right, I think that's a solid pick there. Talk about our number 10 guys. My number 10 guy is Mike Evans. He's a guy who burned me a little bit last year as I had him, and he didn't quite perform to what I was hoping. But you have to pull your emotions out of it, and this is going to be a bounce back year. His first 3 straight years in the NFL, he had improving stat lines until last year, his 4th year. He kept increasing, and last year he took a step back last year. However, that was because he struggled a little bit with injury, and Winston struggled with injury. And when you don't have your quarterback and when you miss a few games, no wonder. And yet he still managed to pass 1,000 yards and have 5 touchdowns. So he still had an okay fantasy season. When Winston and him come back healthy this year full, he's going to get back to his old form and even more. What I love about him, and the reason he is so good, is bulk. We talk about Winston. One of the coaches said he just force feeds the ball too much, especially to his number 1 option, Mike Evans. Says that his biggest problem is he just kind of forces the ball too much downfield, which is actually great for Mike Evans. He averages 145 targets a season. That's huge. Another thing that I like is that their defense is bad. Mike Evans, a lot of his stats come from these fourth quarter passes and this need for them to do things to win the game. Well, they were one of the worst defenses in the NFL last year, and they gave up more yards than any other team in the NFL, even Houston, who gave up the most points per game. So that's why I like him. If it weren't for an injury, he would have had another fantastic year last year. He's going to be healthy this year, and that defense is bad as ever, and he's really the guy there.
Yeah, so for me, my number 10 guy is Mike Evans. We agreed on this pick. Some people might wonder, why Mike Evans over Julio Jones, like your jersey there? Well, remember, it comes to standard league, it's all about the what?
It's all about the touchdowns.
It's all about the touchdowns, right? Julio Jones only averaged 5.5 in his career. Now, if it's a PPR league, I take Julio Jones over Mike Evans. Okay, I'm going to flip those guys. Now, Mike Evans in his first 4 seasons has averaged over 1,000 yards per season. Currently in the NFL, only him and A.J. Green are the only wide receivers to do that. Forget Antonio Brown, all those guys. It's only Mike Evans and A.J. Green that have accomplished that. Another thing, twice in those 4 years, he's had seasons of 12 touchdowns. So that's nice. He's young at 25. The Bucs signed him a long-term deal. They love this guy. They have a lot of confidence in Mike Evans, which bodes well. And I think it's all about volume, like you said. Back in 2016, he led all wide receivers in targets with 173. Winston loves to throw the ball his way. So to me, he's a guy. He's 6'5". He's a big target in the red zone. I think he's my number 10 guy.
Yeah, exactly. Very solid choice there at number 10. I'd be happy to get him. Our number 11, guys. Now I have Odell Beckham. You talked a lot about him. I don't have a whole lot to add to that. I like what you said about how actually if you project his stats out, they have been kind of slowing down over the last few years. I think that's very true. I think that Ingram and Shepard and Barkley will keep him up there as a solid number. They're weird. They offer a floor and a ceiling to him. He'll never be just insane. He'll never get 17, 15, 16 touchdowns, insane amount because there's so many weapons there. But he's not going to get 4. Because he's a good enough wide receiver and it's hard to double team him. My big concern is that he's played 4 years in the NFL. In 3 of those 4 years, he struggled with injury. At 5'11", only 198 pounds, that just clearly is an issue for him. And the fear is that he'll miss some more games this season because of that. I just like to see a guy who, again, like the other guys above him on this list, are just more consistent. Evans sure had an injury last year, but only once in his 4-year career has he been injured. Odell Beckham has been injured 3 out of the 4 seasons, so that's starting to be an issue for me as far as when I take him.
All right, so my number 11 guy is Julio Jones. He has broken over 14 receiving yards the last 4 years. Between the years of 2013 2015, he averaged 7.8 catches per game. That projects out to 125 catches over 16 games. In 2015, right, he had 136 catches, 1,871 yards. If there's any drawbacks with this guy, it comes down to touchdowns. He has a hard time finding the end zone, which is odd. He's 6'3", 220 pounds. He's a big physical back, and he's only averaging 5.5 touchdowns per game. He's not young anymore at 29, but he's still got a few good years ahead of him. He's, to me, the best next talented wide receiver out there.
Yeah, I very much like that pick there. For me, he actually drops out of the first round, but we'll get to my final pick here at number. I get a lot of hate for this. I've never done this in the past. This isn't something I would recommend doing, but my number 12 guy is Travis Kelce, and here's why. We want to talk about if you want to have a dominant fantasy team, you need to cover every position. You can't afford to have a lacking position. And Travis Kelce is the guy at tight end that's going to help you get that position filled. Now, go watch our tight end rankings video. I'm not going to talk a whole lot about this, but Rob Gronkowski and Travis Kelce are hands down the 2 best tight ends. Outside of that, tight ends are kind of brutal, and you might as well not take one. With my concerns with Gronk's health, there's a reason that I put Kelce ahead of him. He's been so consistent. Here's why it's so important, though, because of how fast the drop-off is. Last year, the number 1 fantasy scoring tight end scored 139 points. The 4th ranked fantasy scoring tight end only scored 90. That means the only 3 tight ends later, you're only getting 64% production from the number 1 guy. It is so important that you either get Gronk or Kelce, and I have to put Kelce ahead of Gronk because of the health. He has missed only 1 game in the last 4 seasons, his 4-season NFL career or whatever it is, and it wasn't due to injury, so that's not something that you have to worry about. Really like that he's a big target guy. He gets 117 targets last year. 31 of them came in the red zone, so basically 26%, a quarter of the times he's targeted is in the red zone, so touchdowns are not a problem for him. To, I guess, exacerbate and to show you how bad Gronk's injury problem is, he's only played 62.6% of his games since 2012. So since 2012, you're getting him a little over half the time, which is what for me makes Kelce so much better. And then again, the last thing I'd like to add is Patrick Mahomes, their young quarterback, and the just average receiving core is going to be a great fit for Kelce in that he's going to check down the ball a lot to his big tight end, who's an easy throw for a few yards here and there, especially in the red zone. So I have to put Kelce number 1 because if you want to have a good tight end, you're going to have to take him, and you're going to have to take him above everybody else.
Okay. I know we're going to hear some comments on Travis Kelce, so let's bring him on out. Love to hear it. So for me, my 12th guy, my final pick in the first round would be Melvin Gordon. I'm not a big fan of picking Gordon in the first round, if I'm being honest, but it's standard leagues once again. Putting feelings aside, he makes the most sense with this pick. TD's reign supreme, as we said, in standard leagues. Melvin is better than any other wide receiver out there. There's no other wide receiver left that you can say, okay, I feel really, really confident that he's going to give me double-digit touchdowns. But Melvin, in back-to-back years, has had 12 touchdowns. And I think that number could actually go up slightly with Hunter Henry now out for the year. He might get 1 or 2 in the red zone there. He's the next safest play, who's really hard to ignore. His on-field production is far from spectacular, but he's very productive. And I'll take a look at this. The last 2 years, he's averaged 1,051 rushing yards, 12 TDs last 2 years, 50 catches, and 447 receiving yards that he's averaged the last 2 years. That's very good. Now, if you're in a league that gives you the bonus for reaching 100 yards per game, last year he did that 7 times, that he had over 100 total yards per game. He's very solid. He has no competition for his job, which is really honestly half the battle when it comes to fantasy. I hate running backs by committee. I love having a running back to know that he's the guy. He's going to get a majority of the carry, especially in the red zone. So he's a safe and solid pick. He's got a very high floor, but a lower ceiling than maybe the previous running backs we have mentioned. But he makes the most sense in standard leagues. That's key. So there's my number 12 guy, Melvin Gordon.
Well, I like your number 12 guy. One thing to add to that to really support that pick is that defense is really starting to get good. And this is no longer the days of Phillip Rivers throwing the ball 45 to 50 times a game. I think that defense steps up, and you know what? They say, all right, we're fine. We're winning in a lot of games. We'll just keep pounding the ball on them, and I think that could really increase his numbers.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us at FFP. Once again, subscribe, get the word out to your friends, look for some of the things that are coming out, new products that we have. We're getting excited. Football is right around the corner. God bless and take care.